Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Washington Park Area Mobility Improvements. We're going to get started shortly, probably at 6 o'clock, so just stay tuned. Here's some Brazilian music to keep you on your toes. Good evening, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for the Washington Park Area Mobility Improvements virtual meeting. We are gonna get started today. Thank you so much for spending an afternoon, a lovely toasty afternoon with us. Due to the current health crisis, I think we're all aware that your Department of Transportation and Infrastructure is looking for new ways to conduct their public outreach. This is our first meeting providing you updates on 5 different projects that are happening around historic West Wash Park. So please bear with us as we adjust to this new normal. We will try to resolve any technical issues on the spot. If you are some of the folks that are calling in through the phone line, please, the moment that you jump in, mute yourself because it's actually people will be able to hear you as well as one of the presenters. Before we get started, I would like to extend a thank you to Councilman Clark and Councilman Cashman for helping us spread the word about this particular meeting and for supporting the projects that you're about to see. So we hope this meeting will take about an hour and a half. We decided to add an additional 30 minutes to the meeting to make sure that we had enough times for your questions. The presentation from our team will take about 45 minutes altogether. The team will be answering questions at 3 different times throughout the presentation. If you have questions, please click on the Q&A icon. There's 2 sort of bubbles with a question mark on your meeting bar. Afor Chavez and myself will be monitoring the Q&A window and ask the team questions during these segments. This meeting is also being recorded, so if you know of anybody who was not able to make it, please ask them to visit bit.ly/Dottie blog. The Dottie, as in Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, that Dottie is capitalized. So bit.ly uses capital, so please remember that. The recording, we will be posting the recording up in about 10 business days. As always, please be courteous and respectful of your Dottie staff and each other when asking questions. We will not be answering any rude or derogatory or disrespectful comments on the questions Q&A. So the purpose of this meeting is to provide you an update of, like I said, of the 5 different projects happening around historic West Wash Park. The final design of the Marion Bikeway, the new signal design at the intersection of Marion and Virginia, traffic signal rebuilds happening right now along Downing, the analysis that we have conducted on Downing regarding speeding and issues accessing the park from the west side, and then impacts of the no left turn at Corona that has had on Alameda and on side streets. These studies and designs were started prior to COVID, to the current health crisis. And while some of them are fully funded, like the Marion Bikeway and the traffic signal rebuilds, we're hoping we will still be able to implement the remaining projects in 2021. And with that, I would like to present to you your Dottie team. My name is Gaby Cerrado. I am the community designer for Council District 7, Jolin's district, and I work very closely with our West Wash Park residents. I'll be your moderator for the evening. Ashley Grace is my counterpart in District 6. She's also the project manager for the Marion Bikeway and the signal that is being, that hopefully is going to be built. We also have Fadia Sawaki, one of our Dottie engineers. She's the PM on the traffic signal rebuilds along Downing. And lastly, we have Brad Boncory. Brad used to be the area engineer for District 7. He will be talking to you about the Downing speed and access study and the Alameda after study. In addition, on the line, we also have Emily Cushman, Hadar Albo, Thomas Shaw, Afor Chavez, Jonathan Johnson, all of, from the Dottie team, and Ana Claudia Magalis from the Department of Parks and Recreation. On standby just in case to answer any questions that you all might have. And with that, I will pass it over to Ashley, who will be talking about Marion Bikeway. Ashley?
Great. All right. Thank you, Gabby. Good evening, everyone. As Gabby said, we really appreciate you all taking time out of your evening. I know it's a lovely night tonight. I'm Ashley Grace. I'm here to discuss the Marion Parkway High Comfort Bikeway project and a project that emerged from that effort, which is a signal design for Marion Parkway and Virginia Avenue. I imagine I've met many of you all during the outreach we conducted last year with the Bikeway project, but for those of you that I haven't met, hello, and let's jump right in. Okay, so first off, I'm going to present a few slides that may be familiar to a number of folks, but the intent is to ensure that everyone has a little background on the bike project, especially those that were not part of the numerous meetings we had last year. Get us all on the same page, but again, this is a very abbreviated version, so we have more information online about the bike project. This slide in particular provides a bit of context of the location of the Marion Parkway High Comfort Bikeway. As you can see, this bike facility connects major regional destinations, including the Cherry Creek Trail and Washington Park. It is also considered a multimodal route to Steele Elementary and South High School by way of Wash Park. When we look at self-reporting bicyclist data, we also see that this route is highly utilized, nearly as much as the Cherry Creek Trail on some days. And I imagine most of you all on the phone and joining us are pretty familiar with this area, especially if you live, work, or commute around the Wash Park area. So next slide, please. So a question we received from several folks during the design process was, why are you adding a protected bike lane to Marion Parkway when we already have a striped bike lane? It's a great question. As Denver seeks to build out its bicycle network across the city, we are not only aiming to increase the number of bike facilities, the bike facility miles, but we're also working to improve the safety and quality of facilities, especially those that are major connectors like Marion is. The reason for this is because currently the majority of cyclists on the roadway today are what we consider highly confident or at least somewhat confident cyclists, meaning those are the folks that are already kind of comfortable with what we have on the road, those striped bike lanes, those shared roads with no traffic mitigation, etc. However, Denver has numerous goals related to our bike network, which include making our bike network safer, more accessible, and more comfortable for all users. Reason for this is a recent study conducted in Denver by the Denver's Regional Council of Governments, DRCOG, indicated that nearly 59% of the population would bike more if they felt safer and more comfortable. So those are facilities that are a bit more comfortable than what we typically have on the road today. These are often people with children, people who are just less confident on the roadway. So building safer facilities like we are planning to do on Marion Bikeway helps us build facilities for that 59%, which really helps us get to about 75% of folks out there feeling like they are comfortable enough to ride on the bike facilities in Denver. Next slide, please. Another question we receive is, what is a high comfort bikeway? What is a protected bikeway? This slide illustrates some of the main design features we aim to achieve when designing for a high comfort bikeway. Every bikeway is slightly different depending on the context, but the things we're really designing for are to reduce or eliminate dooring issues, reduce or eliminate parking and loading conflicts, reduce conflicts or attempt to minimize conflicts with turning vehicles, and most importantly, provide space for different roadway users and speeds, which reduces stress for all roadway users. All of these things lead to many benefits that align strongly with Denver's Vision Zero action plan, as well as the Mayor's Mobility Action Plan, including safety, comfort, increased ridership, and shifted trips from vehicles to bikes. So this slide, this timeline, again, this is a very abbreviated version of this presentation, but the intent is to demonstrate this bikeway project has been in the works for a while. What this slide doesn't show is that prior to 2019, this upgrade was identified in Denver Moves Bikes, also in Blueprint Denver. It was included in the Elevate Denver Bond funding package, which was approved by voters in 2017. And in 2019 is when we actually began the official outreach and design process. We had our first public meeting last May, I believe it was. We came back and met with a stakeholder group in June, and then came back in November where we presented a near final design. Since we met in November, we've been busy incorporating everything we heard at that last meeting and throughout the design process, and working on finalizing the design documents into what we call a construction bid package, so that we can bundle that with some of the other Elevate Bond projects and move that towards procurement and then eventually construction. Next slide. So what are we building? This next slide is probably familiar to most of you, or many of you who are familiar with the project. We presented this cross section at that meeting in November. What you can see here on the top left is existing cross section with a parking lane, the bike lane, and then the travel lane. The bottom left shows you what the future Marion Parkway will look like. On the outside, we have a parking lane, we then have a travel lane, we then have a buffer between the travel lane and the bike lane. And that buffer we're able to gain because we've narrowed up the bike and the travel lanes, or sorry, the parking and the travel lanes just a little bit. An important contextual element that we took into consideration with this design is that Marion Parkway is a designated historic parkway. As a result, we have worked hard with the Parks and Recreation team and talked through what that means, as well as really worked through our design to minimize our use of bollards. We heard very loud and clear that folks are not fans of those bollards. There will be bollards still placed primarily at the corners where they are definitely needed most for safety purposes, especially during snow events, to let others know that there is a vertical element, and that vertical element that we are moving forward with, which is again trying to kind of keep with the aesthetics of that Marion Parkway, is a low curb, a concrete curb. You can also see that what we've done with this design is move the bikeway adjacent to the median. This helps eliminate conflicts with the parking and loading zones, among other things. So this is what we presented back in November, and the main piece of feedback we heard at that last public meeting was that we hadn't spent enough time focusing on the intersections. So following that meeting, our project team spent a great deal of time thinking about innovative solutions, working with NACTO, a national leader and organization in bikeway design. And actually, we even got out there. We put tape down on the road, and we actually rode different configurations to figure out what really felt most comfortable for those interested but concerned folks. Again, not just the highly confident, but those that we're really aiming to build this for. So the next couple slides are going to talk about what improvements we've made since we came to you last November. So let's start with the next slide, which is the two minor streets, Cedar and Dakota. The big thing here is we have this new bike box design. One of the main intents here is that it provides a space for folks who are on the protected facility to exit that facility if they want to turn on Cedar or Dakota and orient themselves perpendicular to Marion Parkway so that they can see traffic and wait until they feel comfortable to cross. You can also see on those east-westbound intersecting streets that we're channeling the bikes so that they too are getting oriented in front of vehicles and merging with traffic, and which is, these are very low volume streets, so that folks know they're approaching an intersection and they're ready to cross and be aware of all the different users in this intersection configuration. Before we move to the next slide, I don't have anything on here for Alameda because we're not really doing much for Alameda, and the reason for that is there are no left turns on Alameda, which means there are no conflicts with that median running bike lane, and also we don't want to be encouraging cyclists to be turning onto Alameda either. So the next intersection is definitely a tricky intersection, which is Bayard. As you can see by this drawing, we have made significant changes to this intersection. As many are well aware, this is the same intersection where there was a fatal and tragic crash just last year. The significant changes you've already noted probably are that we are closing off the roadway space in the median. We're closing that off to vehicles, meaning we'll be restricting those southbound Marion left turns onto Bayard, as well as westbound Bayard left turns onto southbound Marion. This is because there are currently very low volumes of vehicles making those turns, and there are high volumes of cyclists entering and exiting the Cherry Creek multi-use path there. We want to ensure there's enough space for cyclists to safely and comfortably queue up perpendicular to Marion so they can make that crossing and feel like they have a very clear view of traffic when they do that. We're greatly reducing a lot of those conflict points. The other thing you may have noticed is that we are making that small section, it's kind of cut off here, but there's a little triangle on the top right of this aerial, and we're making that section on the top of that triangle one way, so it's one way westbound. So when we do that, again, we're reducing the number of conflicts. And also that movement, for those that wanted to go eastbound right there, that was a redundant movement, because if you're headed northbound on Marion, just to the right of that triangle, you can continue northbound and then take a right on Bayard. So again, the more we can kind of minimize conflicts with turning vehicles, etc., the safer we're making it, both for cyclists as well as pedestrians in this area. All right, so now next slide, Marion and Virginia. We've already kind of let the cat out of the bag. We are working on a new signal here. When the bikeway goes in, we will be installing green striping, like conflict markings that will take cyclists from the bike facility on Marion Parkway into the parkway, into Washington Park. However, we heard loud and clear through the design process, through frequent 311 submissions before, during, and after, that this intersection is confusing for all users. We recently installed in-road yield to pedestrian signs, those signs you see in the middle of the road. We've heard great things about those, but we've still heard those are not enough. I've been out there and I've witnessed that more needs to be done. We also collected data in February of 2019, which is a winter day, I want to point out. And it, even on that winter day, indicated that despite it being, early February, there are very high volumes of multimodal users at this intersection, a lot of folks both walking and biking. So when we're thinking about how to make roads safer, again, it is widely recognized that if and when the public right-of-way is designed to serve all users, not just vehicles, it makes it safer for everyone. So based on the years of concern, the feedback we received during the bikeway design, the data, et cetera, we decided that the best thing to do here was to move forward with what we call a pedestrian and bicycle priority signal at Marion and Virginia. So that means it's activated by pedestrians and cyclists, although don't worry, we have our signal team on board and we're working very closely with how this is communicating with the Downing and Virginia signal, which is very close, just west of here. So making sure that although it's pedestrian and cyclist activated, those two signals are talking to each other in some form. It means that there are proper crossing markings, signage, and signals and signal heads to help ensure pedestrians and cyclists know when it is safe to cross. And this signal design, while it's new for Denver, this is the first time we're really designing something that's both bike and pedestrian oriented. There are a lot of examples both in Fort Collins as well as Tucson, Arizona that we are using as kind of our original templates, but again, we're modifying based on Denver, our engineering standards and guidelines, and what we do here and what works in this context. Next slide. So this slide shows the concept of what it's going to look like. There will be one pole and a mast arm on the north side of the median that crosses Virginia. That will have signal heads that control traffic for both eastbound and westbound Virginia. We'll have a second pole and mast arm on the southwest corner that controls the southbound Marion Parkway movement. We don't have anyone leaving the park, so we don't need an additional pole and mast arm to control any northbound traffic. There will be push buttons for pedestrians on all four corners. And then there will be push buttons for cyclists that will be located in the median adjacent to the bike facility so that folks can still stay on their bike, push the button, wait for it to activate, and then cross. We've been working closely with our partners in the Department of Parks and Recreation on this design. We're trying to strike a balance here between the safety that we need to achieve here, as well as the important goals and needs of the park and the parkway. We're also working closely with the forestry team, which is why if you look closely on the northwest corner, you see a bump out. That bump out not only shortens the crossing distance for pedestrians, but also, and importantly, helps us protect the tree on the northwest corner, which again, we've talked to forestry and it is very important and we're working very hard to preserve. And again, we are working on making sure this is coordinated with the Downing, Virginia signal. So finally, some people, you've probably, if you're paying attention, and I know that it's also probably small on some people's screen, but the one thing that's important for everyone to note is the one major change is we are restricting that southbound left turn movement, meaning if you're headed down Marion Parkway south, you can no longer take a left onto Virginia. We recognize this change is inconvenient and it's going to take a long time for folks to kind of get used to that. The good news is we are making improvements at Virginia and Downing that we believe are going to make those left turns a lot easier. So you can head down Downing and take a left turn onto Virginia. And also this area is well served by our grid. There are other ways to head eastbound as needed. But we do believe that this design, that in order to meet our multimodal safety intent of this signal design, we do need to restrict that movement because otherwise it's creating a conflict with both directions of bike travel as well as that eastbound crossing for pedestrians, which again, we do have pretty high volume. So again, we're about to jump into the next step. We'll be talking about the Downing signal improvements, so we could talk more about that. But the next slide is the last slide I have for you, which is the schedule. So the bikeway design, it is complete. We, as I mentioned earlier, are working on kind of bundling that with some of the other Elevate Bond bike projects so that we can hopefully deliver that beginning early 2021. The signal design is underway. We anticipate it'll wrap up by the fall. And then at this point, we are anticipating it will be installed in 2021. We haven't secured all of our funding, so as Gabby mentioned, we want to throw that out there that we will need to keep on working on securing that funding. But as of now, we still feel pretty confident we can deliver the signal in 2021. But as everyone knows, everything out there is quite fluid these days. And now with that, I think that's the rest of my slides.
Yeah, so we're now jumping into Q&A. Just a general announcement, if you're joining us by phone, please mute yourselves. We got some comments from the online participants that we're hearing an echo. If by any chance if you're having technical difficulties, jump out of the meeting and come back in again. I have muted everybody on our side, but we're not sure where the echo is coming from. But we have received some really interesting questions. Ashley, are you ready?
I hope so.
All right. The first one that we have is from Amy. I think the biggest problem with Marion and Virginia intersection is the confusion about who has the right of way through that intersection. I would like to see bicyclists and pedestrians have the clear right of way at all times. Could we make cars beg to come across? And I would like to see the intersection painted green and stripes and very obvious signage. Please protect the most vulnerable road users, including children biking or walking to school. So I think you kind of addressed a little bit of what the improvements are going to be at that intersection. So we're covered the green paint, but would you mind just going over it a little bit, just a quick recap of that improvement?
Absolutely. So again, that signal really, when it is activated, it does prioritize pedestrians and cyclists. The one conflict that we will continue to monitor to determine if there is an issue and if we need to look at things like what's called a leading pedestrian interval, which I'll explain in a moment, is that southbound right turn. So if we're seeing a lot, that's the one time when both pedestrians and cars are being told that they can go to cross Virginia. And if we're seeing a lot of heavy conflict there, then we will continue to monitor it. And a leading pedestrian interval is where pedestrians get a few second head start to get their way into the crosswalk before there's then a green ball for the cars to go, so that the drivers can see that there's someone in the crosswalk. They need to wait, yield until that person is through the crosswalk. So otherwise, again, that eliminating that left-bound turn movement reduces the conflict with anyone.
I have a comment.
The bike and the crosswalk, and there are no northbound turn or folks coming out of the park.
Thank you.
I walk the park almost every day, and I walk through that.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, but
the calls are very, very.
I'm sorry, ma'am. We're going to have to mute you. We're not allowing folks to just interrupt and ask the questions, as we have sort of a process. So I appreciate your comment and question, but we're trying to keep this as straightforward and as open for everybody. Ashley, the next question that we have is, how would you propose, how would the bike lanes be cleaned during the winter and the fall?
That's an excellent question. We got that throughout the design process as well. As we build out and aim to achieve our 125 bike miles in the next or within 5 years for the mayor's goal, one of the things we know that comes with that is making sure we maintain all of that new infrastructure. And so we are continuing to build out our operation and maintenance capacity so we can keep these things cleaned. We currently, some of the first things to really get plowed downtown are some of those bike lanes. You can, if you're ever downtown during a snow event, you see those bike lanes get plowed pretty quickly. So that's the idea, is we're going to keep building up that capacity and keep working to maintain those during a snow event.
Thank you. Actually, this question is for Thomas, as one of our city traffic as one of our engineers. At the Marion and Virginia intersections, we're sort of back into that one again. Can we please make cars beg instead of the bikes and pets? So Ashley touched a little bit about sort of the LPIs, but is there anything else that we can potentially do that it will enhance the safety of bicycle and pedestrians?
To reiterate what Ashley had mentioned during her presentation, we'll also be coordinating the signal with the Downing and Virginia signal, but also be continuing to monitor the intersection to see how we can best prioritize pedestrians and cyclists through the intersection, to always clarify exactly who has the right of way during all times of the crossing. Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess this one could be for Ashley or Thomas. So, well, we have two sort of general design questions. Bikers like to travel 2 to 3 abreast, and they won't be able to do that with the median. How is this design preventing bikers hopping back into the auto lane? I
mean, again, we are designing this for the majority of users. We do believe that when we design space on the roadway for cyclists, not only do we believe it, but it has been demonstrated across the country that when you provide folks, users of the right-of-way, their specific space, there's greater compliance and use of that space. So by providing a very safe cycle space, we do believe that more folks are going to use that for biking, and that frees up the travel lane for folks who are driving. I don't know, actually, I know Brett also has quite a bit of experience of multimodal design. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because I mean, it's very perceptive. Obviously, as you saw, the bike lane, the space that we have to work with in order to put a bike lane here is 5.5 feet to the stripe and then more to the inside the buffer. So yeah, I think 3 to 4 abreast would not work there. The idea is, you know, I think you're right. I think if you're riding 3 or 4 abreast, the idea would be that you probably would want to ride in that travel lane if you really do want to ride 3 or 4 abreast. It's just the reality of the amount of width that we have there and the different the different needs that we have that are competing for all of that width along that roadway. We need width for a parking lane, a travel lane, and a good high comfort protected bike lane. So that was definitely a trade-off that we had to make. So I guess that's kind of the best answer that I think I can kind of provide on that one.
Thanks. Another design question. Did you consider a stop control on northbound Marion at Bayard in place of the yield to pets and shark teeth in advance of the bike crossing?
We did actually explore that option. We even sat down with our city traffic engineer. We looked at the data, and at this time, the volume simply it doesn't meet criteria for that. But again, we've really reduced a lot of the conflicts and the turning movements, et cetera, right there. And I think that we're always open. As I've always said, the right of way is never static. It's always dynamic. If this design still isn't meeting our safety concerns and needs, we're willing to revisit it. And that was even the guidance we were given by the city traffic engineer. But at this time, the data doesn't support an all-way or a stop at that location. And Brett, I see you nodding your head again. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Sure, that was a good explanation, Ashley. I'll just add to that. It's similar to our Marion and Virginia signal and why we wouldn't put a stop sign there. Because of its proximity to the at this Bayard location to the Downing Bayard signal. If you have a red at Downing, that queue would tend to back up through this stop controlled intersection, and that's not a very safe condition. So that also had something to do with it, in addition to the things that Ashley had mentioned.
All right, so we're getting a lot of good questions, and we appreciate everybody being able to type their questions. So let's see, hold on a second. I am trying to go through all of the good stuff. Why no left bump outs on the northeast corner of Marion and Virginia?
Sorry, can you say that again? I'm not sure I follow.
Yeah, so I guess we have not incorporated a bump out on the northeast corner of Marion and Virginia.
Oh, well, again, the true primary reason for that bump out is the tree protection on the northwest corner. It definitely has a benefit of shortening the crossing distance there. However, bump outs can also be very expensive. And at this point, given all of the many improvements that are going in at this intersection, we didn't, and the fact that it'll be signalized, we feel that the safety will be achieved. So that's kind of the primary reason there. And again, the northwest that's a very beautiful, important tree that we want to do our best to preserve.
Another design question, Ashley or Thomas, and this is regarding the future signal. So will this be a typical red, yellow, green signal, or more like a hawk style?
It'll be a typical red, yellow, green signal with 3 indications for all approaches, as well as pedestrian signal indications with the countdown lights.
Excellent, thank you. So I think we have probably a couple more minutes for more questions. Thomas, for you again, please give the activated signal enough time for kids to bike across the street. Most trigger lights in Denver give the same amount of time as cars, and it's not enough time for kids to make it across. So I guess that's just a general comment as we take into consideration traffic signal operations.
Absolutely.
Right. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when we calculate the signal timing, especially for bike facilities, the same way that we have clearance times for vehicles, we'll also be sure to account the crossing distance for cyclists to extend those minimum green times to make sure that pedestrians, cyclists have plenty of time to cross the intersection.
Excellent, thank you. And I guess one last question. How long, Ashley, how long do you think the construction would it be of the Marion Parkway and I guess of the signal?
The bikeway itself, once the construction begins, should really only be a couple months, which is significant, I understand. But the other thing that to note, by the way, that isn't on here is there should be paving of a portion of Marion this summer. We were trying to sync up and merge our construction with the paving, but given how much this bikeway has kind of grown in terms of all the elements we're putting into it, we weren't able to meet that deadline. So there is unfortunately going to be a little bit of paving this summer, as well as once we do get into construction a couple months for the bikeway. Thomas, how long does a signal project like this usually last in terms of construction?
For a signal or a single signal, it should only take about 1 to 2 months for construction. The design will be the majority of the timeline of the project.
And so we, you know, depending on how things align with funding, et cetera, our goal in general in the city is we are trying to do a better job of aligning projects so that we are trying to minimize the construction impact to you all in the community. We recognize that is a hardship and that is challenging. So we will do our best to try to sync things up when we can.
So that is all the time that we have right now for this segment. We have 2 more Q&A segments coming up. The last one, this next section is going to focus on the improvements on Downing, and then the following one is going to be on Alameda. At the end, the very final Q&A, we're going to have focused a little bit on Alameda, but then it's going to be open to all the other questions that we were not able to address. We have some really good ones. So with that, Fadia is going to talk to us about the traffic signal rebuilds happening right now on Downing. Fadia?
Yes, hello, good evening, everybody. Again, this is Fadia Sawagan, and I'll be talking about the Downing Signal Reconstruction Project. So as a part of Mill Levy 13 Signal Rebuild Project, we will upgrade the span wire signals adjacent to Wash Park at Louisiana and Downing, Kentucky and Downing, Virginia and Downing. Since the signal exposition is not a span wire, we will keep it as is. The signal timing improvement along Downing will include the signal at exposition, although we're not doing signal infrastructure upgrade. Next slide, please. The signal rebuild project includes upgrading pedestrian curb ramps and signal equipment to current standards. There will be signal head indication above each travel lane. This will definitely improve signal visibility and makes it easier to install left turn green arrows once it's warranted. We will update signal timing for better progression and add leading pedestrian intervals to cross Downing. This means we'll give pedestrian a couple seconds head start to cross Downing before the vehicles go, so they can establish themselves in the street. We will also update pedestrian crossing times. The signal rebuild will allow us to use reliable detection for bikes, making it safer for all road users. Next slide, please. So we're not changing the geometric layout at Downing and Virginia, but we will be rebuilding curb ramps, upgrade signal equipment, and signal timing to include leading pedestrian intervals. You will see 3-section flashing yellow arrow on Downing over left turn lanes. So the flashing yellow arrow acts like a green ball, so left turners have to yield to oncoming traffic. There will not be a green arrow left turn on Downing, since the majority of turning vehicles were able to clear on yield condition, and the minimum number of turning vehicles is less than what's required to meet the warrant at this time. Can I get the next slide, please? The same with Downing and Kentucky. We will not be changing the geometric layout, but we will be upgrading the ramps, signal equipment, as well as adding leading pedestrian intervals. The biggest change you'll see at Downing and Louisiana will be removing the free westbound right turn and providing approximately 60 feet of right turn storage at the signal. There will be a smaller curb radius at the northeast corner. These changes will eliminate the free right turn pedestrian crossing conflict and promote slower turning speed. We will update signal timing and add leading pedestrian intervals as well. There will be a green turn arrow for northbound left turn as well as southbound left turn. So you will see a 4-section flashing yellow that you can see on the left of the slide. And then for eastbound and westbound, you will see a 3-section flashing yellow arrow on Louisiana. Next slide, please. So for the construction schedule, it's happening now. to late fall of 2020, and the signal timing improvement will be from the fall once the signal is constructed to December 2020. The consultant will finalize signal timing along Downing adjacent to Wash Park, and of course the schedule might be extended depending on normalizing traffic pattern due to COVID-19. Now I'll pass it to Britt Boncory to talk about Downing pedestrian crossing and speed study.
Thank you, Fadia. Again, my name is Brett Boncory. I'm with Dottie, the Transportation Design Group, and I'll be presenting on the Downing speed and pedestrian crossing study right now. As an former area engineer in this area, I was kind of leading this effort. So the goal of this study, we received quite a few 3-in-1 requests regarding the speeding concerns along Downing between Spear and Louisiana, but then also to improve pedestrian crossing and access into Washington Park across Downing Street. So our two goals were to look at those two. Those two things. As far as the project limits, what we looked at with this study was about a 2-mile corridor between Spear in the north and Louisiana in the south. Downing is classified as a signalized arterial, hence the traffic signals, with the posted speed of 30 miles an hour. We have a 4-lane cross-section, 2 lanes in each direction, north of Bayard, and 2-lane cross-section, 1 in each direction, south of Bayard. And this corridor sees anywhere from 16,000 to up to 200,000 vehicles per day, depending on the location that you're measuring from. So in order to get a better understanding of the speeding issues that we heard about, we collected speeds at 4 locations, and this slide is showing the northern section of our study area. The nationally accepted way of evaluating these speeds is using the 85th percentile speed, which means that 85% of vehicles are going that speed or lower. So you'll see that referenced throughout this presentation. So in the north and the south, we conducted the data collection in early January, and for the northern end of the corridor, as shown on this slide, we saw speeds around 35 to 37 miles an hour from Ellsworth to Bayonne, so definitely some really high speeds here, and speeds of 30 miles an hour, which is the posted speed from Dakota to Virginia. And if we go to the southern end of the corridor, we're seeing speeds of 32 miles an hour in both directions between Exposition and Ohio. And then further south, we're seeing some higher speeds again here between Mississippi and Arizona of 36 miles an hour. So this data definitely shows us where we need to pay attention as we evaluate our speed mitigation options, which I'll talk about in a second. So that was speeds. Now for pedestrian access from West Washington Park into the park itself across Downing, as you'll see on the right, generally speaking, we have traffic signals that include controlled pedestrian crosswalks across Downing approximately every quarter mile. Some of these signals, as Fadia just mentioned, are being rebuilt, and so you'll get some upgraded signals there. Those signals are Louisiana, Kentucky, and Virginia, shown in the orange circles here. But one thing we saw as we started looking at this corridor is that there's a pedestrian access gap between Kentucky and Louisiana, where pedestrian crossing opportunities are more than a quarter mile apart. So that's also something we wanted to pay attention to as we considered improvements here. So as you may already know, we have to as engineers use pedestrian crossing data to help us determine if locations meet city criteria for a pedestrian crosswalk. So we collected counts at a couple locations along Wash Park. We collected counts at Downing in Mississippi, which is exactly between Kentucky and Louisiana and gets us back to that half-mile crossing spacing. And then we collected counts at Downing in Ohio. Downing in Ohio might seem a little random, but this was another location where we've received a few requests for counts and pedestrian crossings there, and so we wanted to take a look at that during this study. What we saw at Downing in Ohio, can you go back? Yeah, there you go. What we saw at Downing in Ohio is that we had a pretty minimal amount of pedestrian crossing happening there during the highest hour of the day. But at Downing in Mississippi, we saw a much larger amount. I think we had around 23 peak hour pedestrian crossings there, which meets our criteria for placing a marked crosswalk at a location like this, which which kind of brings us to our recommendations, kind of just to keep this short and sweet. So these are the recommendations, starting with the northern half of the corridor. At Spear and Downing, some of the speeds along the corridor in this area that I mentioned previously begin right at Spear, where we have a double right turn lane. This not only allows for faster speeds around this turn, but it also makes it difficult for pedestrians to cross on green. So we plan to remove that second right turn lane to increase pedestrian safety there. From Spear to Bayard, we're proposing to rebalance some of these lane widths. As you might know, the lanes are pretty wide, and so we're going to do some restriping to encourage some slower speeds. At Ellsworth and Downing, we're going to study the potential for a marked crosswalk and rapid flashing beacon here. Again, for this, we'll need to conduct counts. This was kind of an improvement that came up somewhat late in our study after COVID-19 was a thing, and so we haven't been able to do our regular data collection as we would. So this will be done later when things kind of normalize out, but definitely on the list of improvements. And then at Virginia, as Fadia mentioned, we'll be modifying the signal timing to include at leading pedestrian interval every cycle to allow the pedestrians to get out in front of those right turning vehicles before they go. Now for the southern end of the corridor, right around Washington Park, we'll be modifying signal timing at Exposition, Kentucky, and Louisiana to include the LPIs, leading pedestrian intervals. And then at Downing in Mississippi, this is where we had that high pedestrian crossing volume. We'll install new marked crosswalks with pedestrian refuge and flashing beacon here. So Gabby mentioned we have Parks and Rec on the call here. We're coordinating with them on adding a ramp on the park side, connecting to the Washington Park path there, and also connecting to provide better access to that RTD transit stop that's on the east side of Downing. And then further south along the corridor, in order to mitigate some of those high speeds that we are seeing, we're also looking to implement some traffic calming in the form of some spot medians and with paint and post between Mississippi and Arizona. So as far as schedule timeline for this, we'll be designing these improvements shortly after this meeting, really, summer 2020, probably through fall 2020, and hope to implement these improvements sometime between fall 2020 and spring 2021. So that's my presentation. Thank you all for being here again. I think you're on mute, Gabby.
Mute. Yes, I'm on mute. Sorry, everybody. So we're back. We are on our second round of Q&A, and this time around, I know that we have several of our folks calling in. So if you are on a call, if you're on your cell phone or a landline, and you would like to ask a question to the team, this is a live event. Everybody can hear you, so please keep it PG-13, keep it respectful. But if you have a question, please unmute yourself, and you have 30 seconds to answer to ask your question. Anybody from the phone? Are we having technical difficulties? I think so.
I wonder if you could recap. I couldn't hear what you were saying about turn signals at Louisiana and Downing. I heard you say there might be turn signals on the north and south side. Could you please mention what the east-west turn signals are going to be?
So yes, the eastbound left turn and westbound left turn will be a 3-section flashing yellow arrow, and the flashing yellow arrow will act like a green ball. So basically the left turn has to yield to oncoming traffic. So there will not be a green arrow at this time.
All right. Anybody else from the phone that has a question? I'm not seeing, but okay, so let's jump over to the online questions, and we have some really good ones. So thank you, everybody, for please continue to ask away. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go right ahead.
Question. Earlier you said something about Dakota and Cedar, and they don't cross. So were you just talking about them collectively hooking up with Downing, or?
That may have been in reference, this is Ashley, to the Marion Parkway project. Marion Parkway
Okay.
has it crosses Cedar and it crosses Dakota, and we're treating both of those intersection treatments the same. So I was referring to what we're doing to both of those two intersections.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else on the line? All right, so let's go to the from the online. Fadia, we have a question concerned that the right turn changes on Downing and Louisiana could cause cut-through traffic onto Arizona. Has this been studied?
No, it has not been studied because I am kind of missing how is the right turn from westbound Louisiana into Downing will increase the cut-through traffic.
I think this is in relation probably, I think there might be a misunderstanding. So this is Brett again. We're actually not taking away a right turn lane. Is that correct, Fadia, going east?
Correct. We're actually providing more storage for the right turn because before it was a free right turn with not enough stacking, so barely a car can turn right. But now we're providing 60 feet of storage for them. So there will be more, I'm assuming and hoping, right turners can go at the intersection. So we're not eliminating travel lanes, we're actually providing more storage for westbound right turn. Also, I just want to explain that this is also a signal reconstruction project with some geometric changes. Definitely down the road, if we have more concerns, we can look into 311 or PocketGov, and area engineer will do further study and analysis for traffic-related concerns.
Fadia, another question for you, sort of related to traffic-related concerns. There was recently there was a serious cyclist injury at Louisiana and Downing. How will this new traffic signal rebuild make this intersection safer for bikes? Will the new intersection allow for a bike lane on Louisiana rather than Sharrows as specified in the Denver Moves plans?
At this time, this intersection is just improving the westbound right turn, providing a storage, but in general, with having better detection for bikes, we'll pick them up, we'll give them enough time to cross. The bike lane on Louisiana may be a different project that's gonna come, and with the signal rebuild, there is the possibility and the ability to add bike signal if it's needed. So I assume that's how we will help bicyclists at that intersection. Also, once we review the crash report, we'll understand how the crash happened, which direction, is there something we can do? But yeah, the bike lane project will be separate than the signal rebuild project, but we can definitely add bike signals down the road since we have the upgraded signal infrastructure there.
Brad, why do we have to use 85th percentile rule? It seems like the more people speed, the higher we end up making it the speed limit. Data shows that 20 miles per hour substantially reduce risk to vulnerable users. Please consider adding infrastructure that slow people to 20 miles per hour.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I have to say this is a function of general best practice. And an acknowledgement of the fact that no matter what we do, we're not going to get 100% of the vehicles to do what we want them to do. We can do it we can enforce that with our infrastructure as much as we can, but there will always be someone that can drive really quickly through this infrastructure. To your point about the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, so there is a citywide effort to kind of reduce speed limits in general. That is a much larger effort than what we're talking about here. We kind of wanted to, based on city criteria, just at least for this this project in the short term, at least get those speeds down to what we're saying they should be with the posted limit. Start there. And then if we feel that they do need to go down below, because you are right, I mean, decreasing to 20 miles an hour substantially reduces the risk to vulnerable users. But we can evaluate that at that point because there's a lot of trade-offs there as well as far as travel through the area. So good question.
Thank you. Are there any Brad, is there any seasonality adjustments based on when the pedestrians counts are taken to infer a whole year of data? The person online says, I would imagine crossing on spring on summer weekends are much more frequent than a winter weekday afternoon.
Yeah, so at this point we haven't been in, we're not there yet, but we're getting there to be able to develop some well-developed seasonal adjustment factors for pedestrian activity. This is actually relatively new thing in the industry to be able to do that. So we're actually currently looking at some data from Toronto, I believe, to be able to help us to do that. But in general, with these particular pedestrian crossings, for instance, at I think it was Downing and not Kentucky, but the one just north of Downing, Mississippi, that did not qualify, did not meet criteria. It wasn't really that close. If it was close, we would probably take those seasonal adjustments into consideration.
Thank you. A question for Fadia. Can you define storage? The PowerPoint says that you're adding 60 feet of right turn storage.
Yes, approximately 60 feet from the stop bar back to the start of the right turn bay. So it fits like 3 cars roughly.
Okay, thank you. So we have probably time for one more question. For Fadia or Brad, at Louisiana and Downing, is the curb radius on the northwest corner being increased from the existing condition? If so, why?
It is increased a little bit to accommodate the bus turning radius. I'm not sure if you got turning template. I'm not sure if you guys notice, if you go out now, you'll see that curb beaten by cars going over it. So it's not like we increase the crossing distance or the crossing time needed for pedestrians, but it will help a little bit with the bus turning.
Okay. Alrighty, so that is all the time that we have for Q&A. We're going to have one more Q&A segment at the end of this. There's going to be a chunky one. So we're going to tackle a little bit of a couple of questions for Alameda, and then whatever we have not been able to answer yet for the other topics. So for now, I'm going to throw it right back out to Brett, who's going to talk to us about the Alameda after study.
Thanks, Gabby. Brett again here, talking about the Alameda after study. So for this one, we also had 2 goals of our study. First one was to analyze the impacts of a left turn restriction at Corona Street that occurred back in 2018. Some of you might remember that. And then also to look at kind of higher level interim and long-term solutions to address safety concerns along the Alameda Avenue corridor. So, next slide. So some of you might remember back in 2018, we conducted what we called the West Washington Park Alameda Traffic Study. As a result of this study, we saw, because of the study, we saw that we had a higher than expected number of crashes at Corona Street, which was associated with the 90-degree angle crashes that were occurring between the westbound left turns and the eastbound through movements, if you can kind of imagine that at that location. And then this study kind of also uncovered that we had some decently high speeds along Alameda as well. So since a signal was not, as far as our improvement, since the signal was not warranted at Corona Street, which we looked into, we restricted left turns to mitigate that crash picture that's there. And we also added some speed limit signs as a first step towards mitigating high speeds along Alameda at Pennsylvania and Corona Streets. Next slide. So with this after study that we're doing now, we wanted to look at the impacts of that left turn restriction at Corona. And really, we've heard from residents about the cut-through traffic that this might have caused on specifically Ogden and Clarkson to the north and south of Alameda. And then also as part of this study, another question we wanted to answer is to kind of zoom out and look at a more holistic potential safety solutions along Alameda Avenue to further mitigate the speeding and some crossing issues that we're seeing at Franklin and Alameda. Next slide. So as far as existing conditions on the corridor, Alameda is also a signalized corridor, just like Downing, posted speed limit of 30 miles an hour. We have 4 lanes, 2 in each direction west of Franklin, 2 travel lanes, which is 1 in each direction east of Franklin. And this corridor, depending on where you are, will see an average of 15 to 19,000 vehicles per day. And just kind of wanted to call out where there are a few left turn restrictions along the way. One at Pearl in both directions, at Corona in all directions, Downing and Marion. So we kind of wanted to drill down into a per direction volume as we kind of look at how can we look at more holistic solutions on Alameda. So as you can see, we see it's a broad range. We see anywhere from 3,800 to 10,500 vehicles per day per direction, depending on where you are. As a note, the segments here that exhibit those 10,000 vehicles per day per direction are typically in the realm of what we consider that we would consider a one travel lane to be able to handle. So that's just something to note as we move through this PowerPoint. And as you can see, these are the speeds that we called out in that study that looked at the speeds along Alameda is up to 34 miles an hour. And again, yes, it is posted at 30 miles an hour. So to evaluate our first question is what are the impacts of the left turn restriction at Corona Street? So to evaluate that cut through question on Clarkson and Ogden, we collected some volume and speed data on a weekday and weekend day in late September 2019 to the north and south of Alameda. Now this slide's showing for Clarkson. What we saw is that we have between 350 to 600 vehicles per day and speeds between 21 and 24 miles per hour, depending on the day and time. The kind of aha here is that these volumes and speeds are comfortably within the realm of what we at the city would expect for a local neighborhood street. And kind of same thing goes for Ogden. We see between 450 and 662 vehicles per day here with speeds between 20 and 24 miles an hour. These speeds, in addition, just like Clarkson, are well within the realm of what we would expect for a local neighborhood street. So kind of moving towards Franklin Alameda, we wanted to take a deeper dive into this intersection, which has been the subject of many resident concerns, specifically related to crossing as a vehicle or pedestrian. So a previous study has also found that in February 2019, we looked at installing a traffic signal here to help with that crossing. It was found that yes, we have a developing crash pattern here. We saw 5 what we call correctable crashes in a 12-month period. Those were right angle crashes that could be mitigated. But when we look at the volumes that are entering this intersection, it does not meet those volumes, the criteria for a signal or a pedestrian crosswalk. But with that crash pattern, with those 5 crashes in a 12-month period, that does raise some flags for us and tell us that there's still a safety issue here that we want to look into mitigating. Next slide. So with this slide, we're kind of going back a little bit to the Corona Street diversion topic and the related safety impacts of that diversion. So as you can see, we collected, we kind of did an analysis of crash data before and after and came up with an annual rate to kind of compare how these things are operating after that, how these intersections are operating after that restriction. And so we see that the Corona annual average rate after the left turn restriction went from 4 crashes per year to 1.5. This is the direction we want to see. This is good news. We want to continue to go in that direction. With Clarkson, it remained relatively the same. And with Ogden, the crash rate went up ever so slightly. This is still below what industry considers expected crash rate, but definitely something to keep an eye out when we consider improvements. So now moving forward, with that data and analysis that we did, we're recommending some next steps along this corridor. So like I mentioned, considering what our westbound volumes are, so directional westbound volumes on Alameda are, that they're somewhat low, and considering the speed and safety issues at the unsignalized intersections, we're recommending the removal of a westbound travel lane, with the exception of at Downing and Marion, to make sure that we get traffic through those busy intersections. What this does, and if you go to the next, I think it's the next click over, what this does is introduces a two-way left turn lane, gives us some space for a two-way left turn lane, which will help those eastbound and westbound left turners from feeling that behind pressure that we all feel on Alameda when we're trying to take a left, and kind of forcing us to accept gaps that we wouldn't if we had time. So this turn lane would allow us to accept appropriate gaps before proceeding with that left turn movement, and hopefully make this make this condition safer. This lane repurposing would also allow us to reinforce that left turn restriction at Corona Street that I mentioned earlier with striping, and the red little circles are flexible delineators here in this concept to not only slow down traffic along Alameda, but allow pedestrians to complete their crossing in 2 stages actually for crossing here. In addition, we're also recommending the addition of several what we're calling spot medians. This basically just means a median at a particular location in what was formerly a travel lane. And then they're shown here, our potential locations are shown here in the green boxes at 6 locations. And this would be in order to slow drivers down in the area and allow for, again, that safer pedestrian access across Alameda. And this is an example of one in the top right, I'll say. One thing I will say, just to set expectation here, most everything in this picture is what a spot median would look like, with the exception we're not using that thermo khaki paint. What we've seen around the city as we've used that is it doesn't necessarily meet the benefit to cost that we want to see with those. We think just the bollards and the paint gives us basically the same amount of safety benefits without adding that thermo khaki paint in the middle of that median. So moving forward, at Alameda and Franklin, I mentioned the 5 crashes in a 12-month period that we were paying attention to. So what this lane repurposing would also allow us to do is introduce a safer condition at Alameda Franklin here, where the eastbound traffic next down to 1 lane already east of Franklin. Here we propose to add medians to both sides of the intersection, and we'd actually transition that eastbound lane to 1 lane prior to the intersection. What this does is help to mitigate some of those angle crashes that we're seeing that were occurring due to the existing lack of visibility to both of those eastbound lanes as they approach the Franklin intersection. And again, this also helps for pedestrians trying to cross here. It allows them to do a little bit more of a 2-stage crossing and have a little bit more protection as they do so. So as far as timeline for these improvements, we plan to design these improvements starting this summer through the fall, and implementation would be later, likely beginning in spring 2021. But again, still considering the comments that Ashley and Gabby had about our budget with COVID and things like that, it's kind of to be determined. But our plan at this point would be spring 2021 to start implementation of those. So thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad. I'm unmuted. Sorry. Thank you. So quick question, Brad. So all the data that you collected for both of these, Downing and Alameda, these were prior to COVID, correct? We have a note saying prior to the COVID stay-at-home order, there was a constant and consistent violations at westbound Alameda traffic at Marion.
That is correct, Gabby. Yep. All the data collected here was before COVID-19. As you can imagine, our city traffic engineer has asked us to kind of take a pause on data collection, and so with the traffic numbers not being normal. So yeah, this is before COVID.
So we also have, Brad, we have several questions about speed reductions. So a lot of people are wondering, how can we go about in reducing the overall speeds? Tinley says, my 9-year-old son is here with me right now. He wants to know how we can get speeds down from 34 miles per hour to 20.
Good question. I think it relates to kind of what I was saying before. It's the same answer as the Downing question. we do see significant reduction when you go down 20 miles an hour. This is a very smart kid. But I think again, this is kind of an iterative process. It's a much larger question to ask to get those speeds down. And we can certainly engage our Vision Zero team with that. I know they're looking at speed limit reductions throughout the city. And so maybe Alameda can be thrown into that. But for now, what we want to do is at the very least, get those speeds down to 30 or below, with the hope of creating more safer conditions in the future.
Thanks, Brett. Another one, of course. What is it? A participant says, I think they should have measured data at Emerson, which is a one-way with a stoplight at Alameda. It is heavily traveled as through street from the highway and Spear. Why Clarkson, which is much less traveled?
Yeah, so I think our data, and I'm gonna pull up my Google Maps here to make sure I'm saying the right thing here. Our kind of idea was that Emerson serves more of a collector purpose, and so what we were really concerned about is if there was a high number of vehicles going through these local roads, that was the crux of the matter. Emerson is a collector; it's a signalized corridor, I believe, and so it can handle a lot more traffic. And so really, and it was really informed by resident requests and concerns to look at Ogden and Clarkson. So and they're local roads, they're neighborhood roads, and that's why we had a higher concern for those and looking at the cut through traffic there.
Brett, is volume considered a factor for placing a signal but not safety, or how do we take into consideration safety when we're looking at traffic signals? I guess this relates to Franklin and Alameda.
Yeah, really good question. So yes, safety is a factor when we look at signals, and like I said, it met the crash warrant for a signal, but that doesn't mean that it met our criteria for installing it. So it met a crash warrant, but it still needs to meet a certain volume threshold. Now, when we have a safety issue that we're trying to mitigate, those volume thresholds are relaxed quite a bit in our warrants, but it still didn't meet those relaxed thresholds that are based on national best practice and research. But great question. It does take into account safety.
Thanks. I'm going to open it. So we have about, that was the final presentation. We have about, 22 minutes for Q&A, but I'm going to try to open it back up again for folks that are on the line. If you have any questions about not just right now Alameda, but any of the other projects that we heard about today, please unmute yourselves, and you have 30 seconds to ask your question. Anybody on the line?
Hello?
Yes.
Thank you for opening it up. My question is, could you clarify again? You're at Downing and Alameda going west on Alameda. Is that going to be 3 lanes with just one going west? Maybe I heard that wrong.
So good question. That was the one exception. So we did look at taking the westbound lane reduction all the way through this whole section through Downing and Marion. And we did a little bit of analysis, and we saw that while we are okay with a certain level of delay added because of safety, if we were to take away that westbound travel lane at Downing, because of all the traffic that's also trying to get through that intersection on Downing, it made that signal really difficult to manage. And so you would see backups on Alameda and Downing, and pretty significant backups. Again, we're definitely okay accepting a certain level of backup due to safety, but it was completely over capacity. And so when that happens, it ends up being like a nightmare scenario for us. So we are actually planning on keeping the condition the same as it is at Downing and Marion for that purpose.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody else on the phone that would like to ask a question? All right, so let's take one of the online questions. So we have a general comment and then a question for Brad. The road diet for Alameda lane repurposing is amazing. Can you explain why it wasn't extended farther west to Pearl?
Good question, and this is a question that I had to answer to Gabby plenty of times, because she asked the same question. So mostly due to the fact, one thing we didn't mention is this design and analysis was done in-house. This was kind of a special circumstance where we tried to do it on our own, and we only have certain resources for that. So that's one thing, we're kind of limited in our scope of analysis. But two, when you look at the speeds, and you could go back to the slide, just probably not necessary, but when you look at the speeds along Alameda, they are lower towards the west end of the corridor when you start to get to Pearl. And so there wasn't as much of a focus, but there's certainly potential there for the future, and something to evaluate for future beyond Pearl to the west.
Nice. Okay. Brad, another one about Alameda. With the proposed changes to alter the lane configuration, is there an opportunity to add a little bit of a buffer space between the pedestrians and the vehicles? The sidewalks on Alameda, obviously they're not detached, they're right next to the roadway. And so is there an opportunity for that? And I'm sorry about my dog barking in the background.
Hey, it's the new normal.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Just give us one moment before answering your question.
Great.
So it's a great question, actually, and it's something I think we should consider as we move forward into design of this. It's a great question because, you know, as you walk along Alameda, the sidewalks are very close to that roadway. A couple things that we would consider when making when answering that question and kind of considering that trade-off is, as far as speed reduction, the closer that we can get vertical elements to the travel lanes and kind of narrow up those travel lanes, the more likely that speeds are going to reduce. That would be one thing that I'm thinking about. If we did add a buffer, say, to the sidewalk side, that would kind of push, in some ways, push the vehicles kind of away from that curb, maybe encouraging still some fast movement. But that's definitely a good comment that I think we should consider as we move forward. So thank you.
So we have a couple of other comments, also Brad, and then I'm going to throw it back out to the team because we have some other questions about the previous projects. Brad, there is no place to cross Alameda from Marion East through University. During rush hour, Alameda is very difficult to cross. Please reconsider your Franklin decision. So that's a general comment. If we can just take another look. Sorry, my dog. Afor, you may need to take in. And I know that we had somebody on the line that had a question. Are you still there?
Muting me. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I'm Tanya Wheatley from Wash Park, and my question is about the intersections of Ogden and Corona after the proposed changes. Since there will still be no left turn onto Downing from Alameda in the westbound direction, do you anticipate taking down the no left turn at Corona after there is a designated left turn? I know they said there was a slight increase of accidents on the corner of Alameda and Ogden this past couple of years. I live here and only a block in, not even a block in, half a block in, and I've seen quite a few additional traffic accidents. So I would like to know that exact number and what's going to be done once the left turn lane is instigated.
I guess I'm having trouble understanding what the question. Could you restate your question, maybe?
Yeah. So if you're going to implement a no left turn lane traveling west on Alameda, are you going to keep the no left turn sign at Corona, or are all streets going to be accessible?
Oh, so we're actually not restricting. So we're implementing a left turn lane at Ogden and Clarkson, two-way left turn lane. We're keeping the Corona left turn restriction. And in fact, we're reinforcing that so that folks do not disobey that restriction there. We're reinforcing that through the use of vertical posts. And so, but to answer your question on how we're trying to make Ogden safer, it would be the fact that now you have a left turn lane to wait in. A lot of the time when we see these 4-lane roads where we allow left turns from, a lot of people that are waiting in that inside lane trying to take a left feel all that pressure behind them from those cars traveling super fast, and they tend to accept these gaps that are not as acceptable, right? Because you feel that pressure. That left turn lane has proven, adding a left turn lane has proven to help with that conflict and make that a little safer. Does that answer your question?
So the increased traffic we're feeling on Ogden will remain.
The increased traffic, yeah, it will likely remain at the same volume that it is. And what we saw,
right, which is about twofold since about a couple of years ago before the no left,
Yeah, I understand, and I think that's one reason why we wanted to look at it to see. Okay, it probably did increase. We acknowledge that, but to what extent did it increase that we actually need to should actually kind of do something about it. And again, it is in the local road range of volumes that we would expect. Gabby, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Let's jump into questions about the other projects that we were not able to answer before. Ashley, can you talk about the budget for the Marion PBL and why the Elevate bond was insufficient to complete this on time?
The funding is there. The funding is sufficient. We are able to move it forward. It's more a matter of these projects, because we are committed to looking at the context in which we're designing, and also committed to finding smart delivery processes. The projects have been taking a little bit longer to design. So Marion Parkway definitely took a little bit longer because we had a lot more nuanced conversations with the community than we anticipated, as well as we are bundling this project with a few other Elevate bond high comfort bike facilities that are actually just wrapping up their design. And the reason we do that is it really is a very both cost efficient opportunity for the city to deliver these projects. And it also actually helps us speed up some of the procurement processes when we can kind of bundle them, because once we get to a certain number, we then have to go to council for approval, et cetera. So it's more just it's taking a little bit more time to sync things up than we originally anticipated, but the funding is there.
Great, thank you. I guess this question is for Fadia about the traffic signals. And I think I just lost the question. 1 second. Oh, there we go. Fadia, will rolling access for pedestrians pushing strollers, for example, and or wheel-bound individuals, users, improve access at the intersections that are scheduled to be improved?
Can you repeat that question? I guess don't understand it. Is it asking about the access as ramp rebuild or the timing?
Yeah, I think just in general. So, I mean, what are, how are the traffic signals improvements, the rebuilds, going to improve the safety for folks that are either wheelchair bound or they're in the strollers?
Yes. Okay. So couple ways that's done by rebuilding the curb ramps, making it ADA accessible, and the sidewalks that help with wheelchair and people that need leveled surface to cross. And the signal timing, we're adding the LPI that gives them a head start. If they're needing more time to cross, we can definitely look into increasing the walk time at the signal, but we're going to start with the LPI, the leading pedestrian interval, for the signal timing aspect of it.
Thank you. So we also have for Ashley, a next question. Can you talk about Ashley or Brad, can you talk about any options you have considered for honoring Alexis bounds within the project scope of the Marion project?
So I actually confirmed today with our area engineers also on the line. The process has been initiated for the memorial sign, which is our kind of standard memorial opportunity. So that actually, the hope is that will be installed within the next month and a half or so. So there will be a memorial sign on Marion Parkway.
Excellent, thank you. And Ashley, I think, we were expecting this question. As of right now, as you know, right now, Marion and Bayard are closed as a shared street because of the COVID. Have we considered permanently closing the parkway to cars? It has been highly successful to have it closed temporarily during the stay-at-home order.
Sure, that's a great question, and I think something we all have started to accept is that just everything we do tends to be a little bit more dynamic and fluid than we realize. But in general, those closings that happened in early April, they were closed. So we've closed a number of streets, including Marion and Bayard. They are intended to create more space for Denverites to walk, bike, enjoy the outdoors during this health crisis where we need that room for social distancing. I think as of now, these are intended to be temporary treatments, but we will continue to allow for that space as it is needed and until further notice. We're going to keep monitoring the streets, and our bike team and our shared streets team are working together to figure out when the right time also will be to install, in addition to all the other things we've talked about. So, I mean, we really can't say what the future holds, I think, with this whole crisis. So that will probably, if this lasts much longer than we are thinking, it could have an impact on the installation. But as of now, these are more of a temporary treatment. But again, things keep changing, as we all know.
So Brett, there's a lot of questions on the queue about left turns at Alameda and Downing, and why, even with this road diet, why we still have some of the similar restrictions at Downing and Marion. Can you go a little bit deeper into why at this time we can't, why you felt at this time we couldn't do it?
Yeah, so in order to make left turns happen, of course, here we would need the left turn, a space for a left turn pocket or a left turn storage lane, because when you have this much traffic crossing through there, we need to have a place for people to be and to be in a safe condition in order to take that left. Much like the reason that we're putting the two-way left turn lanes throughout the rest of the corridor. And so, in order to do that, we would have needed to take away a westbound lane. And like I had mentioned previously, when we did that, it was similar to what happened. From our analysis, it seemed to be similar. It predicted that it would be similar to what happened a while ago when we did the eastbound lane reduction at Downing, where traffic really backed up through multiple blocks and created a little even safer condition than we have now. I'm with you. That's why we originally thought this lane reduction was going to be so even more great, because we thought we were going to be able to do left turns at Downing, but after doing the analysis, realizing that it is the reality could be something worse than what we have now. So we decided against that for now. Well, obviously, we'll continue to monitor it into the future, and there could be potential for reintroducing that.
All right. Thank you. We have about 5 more minutes of questions. I'm looking through the questions itself here, see which ones we have not been able to answer. Anybody on the line that has questions by any chance? No. All right, hold on a second. Let's see. Sorry, we're getting a lot of good questions, but we're just making sure a lot of them bundle up. Brett, the start of the westbound turn lane further back at Franklin, will that give room for a turn lane at Alameda Downing? Again, the start of the westbound turn lane further back at Franklin, that would give room for turn lane at Alameda and Downing. So I guess we would need to analyze, because at that point we have to wind it back up to 4 lanes so that because of the traffic would get too congested between those 2 traffic signals that are back to back.
Yeah, so we will. So actually the idea, and if actually Jonathan, if you could go down a few slides to the one showing where we're doing the lane reduction. Keep going. Oh, go back. No, actually keep going. So I'm sorry. couple more. Anyways, the lane reduction would include right around Franklin, leading basically, so pulling there it is. So pulling the that 1 lane westbound condition all the way from Franklin to just before you hit Marion. But again, the reasons why we can't add or take away that westbound left turn lane or that westbound travel lane is I've already stated, and we have to continue that at Marion too. So you'd have that lane reduction from Franklin, where it's currently 1 lane coming into the intersection, all the way to almost Marion.
Right, and I think we have a chance for probably one more question for Brett as well. To reduce additional left turn lane on Ogden, this is a little bit of an operations question. Would it be possible to reduce left turn traffic to residents and businesses only to mitigate additional volume and traffic? So I guess is the how, yeah. So, you know, would it be possible to reduce the turning movement, how the people that are turning onto Ogden to only residents and businesses, not for cut-through traffic?
Good question, and this is one that we get somewhat frequently. As a city, and those being public roads, we have not been in the practice of reducing that unless we see, you know, large freight trucks trying to go through a local road. Then we might try to encourage freight truck routing. But them being public city streets and utilizing this great grid, this urban fabric that we haven't been in the practice of doing so. And so that, again, I think we would probably keep it open to both, unless we saw a really high percentage of business cut through traffic.
Right. It's above our sort of our general standards for local traffic, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we're gonna wrap up. You know, we have 2 minutes before officially, you know, calling the end to this meeting. Jonathan, if you don't mind forwarding to the last slide. Thank you everybody for joining us. We hope that you're excited about these projects as we are, your team here. You will see our 2 emails from myself and Ashley. Actually, my email is Gabriela. I just realized that it says Gabby. Is gabriela.serrato@denvergov.org or ashley.grace@denvergov.org. If you have any further questions, further comments, please feel free to email us. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, this presentation is being recorded, and it will be available for folks to share and to comment in our DOTI webpage, in our blog and outreach page. We created a bit.ly to make it a little bit simpler for folks. So it's bit.ly/DOTI blog. The DOTI is all capitalized. If you wanted to know, going into a little bit more, see the presentation, the slides of the presentation itself for Alameda and Downing, they'll be in the DOTI program page, and then for Marion, it will be on the bike program page that you see the links right here. And so with that, thank you so much for everybody for joining us, for giving us an hour and a half, and we hope to see you soon. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.